welcome to camp meeting. I'm so excited to see you guys. All right, the story I'm telling you this week, I'm going to tell you two things right at the start. Okay? First of all is that it is a true story that took place about 150 years ago. Second is that as the week goes on, you're going to want to get a hold of this story. And by the end of the week, kind of maybe like Thursday, I'll decide. I will tell you if you want to know. You can come up and ask me on Thursday, and I'll tell you what the story is called so you can get it for yourselves, okay? So you can have it read at home. All right, I'm going to tell you this story. And the main character in the story is a boy named Satu. Satu was 12 years old, and like many 12-years-old boys, and even boys younger than 12, he had a special hideout, a special secret perch, a place he loved to go when he just wanted to be by himself. Maybe your special hideout is up in a tree, or maybe it's hiding underneath the branches of a low pine tree. Maybe you've got a rock you like to sit on, but I know that none of you have a secret perch like what Satu had, because Satu's perch, his special hideout, was on a rock cliff about 100 feet over the Pacific Ocean, looking off of an island. None of you have a secret perch like that, do you? No. That rock cliff was on the edge of the sea, on the island called Great Sangir. Great Sangir. You can look it up on a map. Great Sangir in the Pacific Island. And right off the shore of Great Sangir, just a little distance away, was another island that Satu and his people called Fire Mountain. Nobody ever went to Fire Mountain, but Satu loved to look at it because in the morning, when he would climb up to his perch, early before his family would be awake to eat breakfast, he could watch the sun rise from behind Great Sangir, and the sun rays would shoot right over the top of his perch and make Fire Mountain glow beautifully. That was one of the reasons it was called Fire Mountain, but not the only reason. Satu was there this morning, watching as the sun rose, and as he was watching the sunlight reflect off of Fire Mountain, reflect off of the ocean, he saw it reflecting in a different, slightly more metallic way off of something that was sailing between Fire Mountain and Great Sangir Island, coming into the bay near which Satu's family and their village lived. It looked like something like a boat, but bigger than the usual boats that Satu and his family and the other villagers would use to go out and to go fishing. It was a much bigger boat, and it was made from something that reflected the sunlight. Their wooden boats didn't reflect the sunlight, but this metal boat painted or colored in white, it reflected the sunlight beautifully, and Satu could not take his eyes off of it. He hoped it would actually stop in at the bay. There was a small, very small, rickety dock down in the bay, and sometimes trading ships would arrive there to bring items that perhaps the villagers would want to trade for. And now Satu watched to see what was happening, and sure enough, it was turning, curving, arcing inwards, and arriving into the bay, coming up to the dock down below. Satu knew he was going to go down there. He knew he was going to have to go down there and see what was going on. And he watched for just a moment to make sure that they were tying up. Yes, they did. They were going to stop there. He ran down from his secret perch, down the curving pathway that was somewhat hidden by bushes and rocks, down the back of that cliffside, down to the sea, where he got onto the beach and ran up the beach all the way to the bay. When he arrived there, already the workers, the sailors on the ship, were unloading large boxes, much bigger boxes usually than what traders would bring when they would come to trade with the people of Satu's village. And many more boxes than they would usually bring when they would come to trade with the people of Satu's village. And the people that were accompanying those boxes were even more unusual. Because there were, of course, the sailors, most of whom lived on the islands in this area of the Pacific and would travel from island to island on these boats, working as sailors and crew. But there were a few people, 4 people, getting off the boat that didn't look like anyone Satu had ever met before. First of all, from a distance, Satu could tell one immediate fact. Their skin color was much lighter than Satu, the villagers on the island, or really than anybody that Satu had ever seen. They looked almost as white as the boat they had arrived on. The second thing he noticed was that they were wearing a lot more stuff on their bodies than Satu was used to seeing. Satu was wearing just his bark loincloth. It was a kind of like, basically like a big underwear that he would wear around him, and it was made from bark that the people would pound with rocks until it made it nice and soft. It was waterproof. It would dry out easily. He was comfortable. That's all Satu would wear. Nothing on his feet, nothing on his top. But these people were wearing things. Am I too far forward, Jed? Am I too far forward for the echo?
No, you're fine.
Okay. These people were wearing things on their bodies. They had like fabric hanging off their shoulders, and they had not little loincloths, but long things running down their legs. And then the weirdest thing of all, their feet. Their feet looked so strange. Their feet did not have 5 toes. Not like Satu and all the other people he ever knew. Their feet, each foot only had 1 big toe. And their feet looked like big black seashells as they walked around. Satu thought, that is the strangest feet I have ever seen. They were shoes. But not only that, the strangest out of all the strange things on these strangers was their hair. There was a tall man and then a young boy who looked very much like the tall man, probably his son. And both of them looked particularly alike because their hair was bright red, bright orange red hair that gleamed as the sun hit it. Satu had never seen hair like that before. And then he saw coming up from behind them a woman with a little girl, much, much shorter. She looked like she must have been, close to the age of one of Satu's little siblings who were about 4, 5, or 6 years of age. And her hair and her mother's hair were the same color. And it was yellow. Yellow like the sun. Gleaming yellow, almost white in its yellowness. And Satu didn't know what to make of this. He just watched them. He stood, mouth kind of hanging open, staring. Never having seen anything like this. He wondered to himself, that hair color, how could that be? How could that be? There is no plant in the jungle I can think of that would make their hair be that color if you rubbed it in there. They must have amazing witchcraft that allows them to get hair color that way. That's amazing. I wonder if they'll teach me. Satu had gotten close enough that he could talk to some of the sailors who were unloading the boxes, and he asked one of them a few questions. Hey, what's going on? Are these people traders? No, they're teachers. What's a teacher? I don't really know, but they said they're teachers. Oh, and are they just stopping by to visit? No, they said they're going to live here. And are all of these boxes things for us? Like they're going to trade with us or presents? I don't think so. I think they said they were going to be building a house and they had all of their supplies with them. Satu didn't know what to make of all this. He would have asked more questions, except it started to rain. And when it started to rain, there was this bustle of activity over by the people with the white skin and weird colored hair. And it was unusual because, see, Satu was accustomed to rain. It rained, at least once or twice a day on these islands. And it didn't bother him. When it started to rain, Satu would not look for anything to hide under. He wouldn't pull out a palm branch. He wouldn't try to hide underneath the overhanging of a roof. He would just stand there and let the rain fall on him. It was beautiful, warm rain. It didn't bother him. But the 4 people, the big man and the little kid with the red hair and the lady and the little kid with the yellow hair, they all quickly pulled out this big sheet of something that was amazing, and it crinkled and made noises, and they pulled it over some of the boxes and made a little tent, and they climbed underneath it, and they huddled underneath there from the rain like they didn't want to get wet. Satu thought that was kind of unusual, and all the workers just kept looking at them as they kept working too. And the tall man who was somehow folded up underneath that little space, underneath that tent, he saw Satu watching, and he signaled to him, "Hey, anyone like this?" And Satu just looked at him, backed away a bit. This was too much strangeness for one day. Satu turned and ran. He ran all the way further up the beach and then up the path leading away from the beach, all the way up to where the village was. The village was set a ways back from the beach. Nobody ever lived or built a home right on the beach, you see, because the beach, where the sand was, and then where the kind of sandy, salty grass shoreline was, that belonged to the spirits of the sea, and so nobody would ever build there. But the village was a little ways up, and Satu ran up to where the village was and up to where his house was. His house, which was really one of the nicest looking ones in the village and stood on stilts quite a bit taller than others. Climbed the ladder up inside, and there found his family eating breakfast. There was his mother scooping out roasted fish, and then also some roots that had been kind of baking in the fire coals, and she was scooping them out using a stick onto plates. Well, large leaves, but they used them like plates, and scooping it out and setting them down on the mat on the ground so that everyone could sit around it. Who else was sitting around? Well, there was a couple of Sattu's siblings, the little ones, and then there was his father, and his father sat there in the place of most importance around this mat, and he looked important. If you were from Sattu's time and in Sattu's village, you would have immediately recognized that this man was a chief, because he had some of the symbols a chief would have. He had special earrings that were made from the teeth of some wild animal. And then he had on his chest a tattoo that had been carved into his chest using a hot knife. And it was a tattoo of a fish. And it was very beautiful. And Sattu hoped someday that he could be brave enough to be a chief like his father and get the fish tattoo on his chest too. Because the man with the fish tattoo was the chief. And the man with the fish tattoo, well, everyone knew the spirits would take good care of the man with the fish tattoo. His father's name was Meriden. Meriden sat there and he said, "Where have you come from? Where were you? What did you see?" He could tell Sattu had some news, and Sattu could hardly wait to get it out. "Dad, Father, there's a boat. It's arrived." And his father was immediately interested. "Oh, traders? Traders have arrived?" "No, Father, they said they're teachers." That's the word that one of the sailors used. "What's a teacher?" His father didn't answer, and in fact his father's only reaction was to furrow his brow and to look concerned about the word teachers. And Sattu thought, it must be an important word. I wonder if it's a dangerous word. And then he said, "Father, they brought lots of boxes, and they have all sorts of things. And they're going to stay here. Where are they going to live, Father? You get to decide, since you're the chief, where are they going to live?" His father didn't answer that either. His father said, "Let's go see." They left breakfast uneaten, headed down to the village, and when all the people of the village who were in the middle of getting their meals going in the morning, taking care of the pigs that lived underneath the houses, on the stilt houses, preparing their nets for the next day's fishing, they all saw Meriden and Sattu walking out of the village heading towards the bay. They all immediately started following out of curiosity. There wasn't much that would normally happen out of the usual there, so they needed to see if there was something neat to watch today. Sure enough, there was, and the people all came down, and as they arrived, the rain had stopped now. The white-skinned people had pulled the tent apart, and they were opening up a box. As they watched the people arrive, they started to hand out things that were in that box, and you know what they handed out was the most amazing thing Sattu had ever eaten. It was this thing. It was white, and it looked like a bunch of sand stuck together, but it was a hard clump of sand. And then when you put it up to your mouth, if you licked it really carefully and kind of nervously like Sattu did, you would lose your nervousness because it tasted so sweet, so good. Nobody knew what this white stuff was, and they just looked at it. Immediately everyone liked these people. Especially when they followed it up with something else. They were the little round things, and they were cold, but they were kind of soft. You could kind of bend them a bit, and if you put these up to your mouth and you kind of carefully put your teeth on them and nervously took a bite like Sattu did, you would immediately lose your nervousness because it tasted so good. This was not a root. This was not a fish. This was amazing. What is this? Sattu was standing there looking at it and tasting it, and wished he could ask. He wished he could speak their language. He looked at the little boy, the young boy who was exactly his height and had the flaming orange red hair, and he looked at it with wonder in his eyes, and the boy knew Sattu was trying to ask, "What is this?" And the boy pointed at it, and he spoke a word that you're going to understand, but Sattu did not understand until well, at least a few weeks later as he learned their language. The boy with the red hair said, "Cookie." Sattu looked at this and looked at the boy. The boy pointed again, "Cookie." And Sattu thought, is he calling me Cookie? The boy could tell he was confused, so the boy introduced himself. "Hans." Okay, Sattu thought, Sattu's smart. He figured out, okay, his name is Hans, so he's going to want to know my name. Sattu. Sattu! Hans! Sattu, Cookie! Oh, now Sattu knew. Cookie. He would know how to say cookie from now on. He would be sure to remember this word if he ever got a chance to ask for one of these again. And then Satu pointed to his little sister with the yellow hair. Marta. Marta. And Satu figured that one out. Okay, this is Hans and this is Marta. Satu. And Hans and Marta had their first friend on the island. There were many other people who wanted to be their friends, at least for the moment, because there were boxes to be carried. And the whole village jumped in to carry boxes up the path up to the village, where they met they met with Chief Meriden, who had helped to carry one of the biggest boxes. He was quite strong. The boxes were piled in the middle of the village, and then Chief Meriden came up to the tall man, the really tall man with the orange hair, and he looked at him, and he said, Meriden, Meriden, and in his language he said, Chief of Village. The man didn't understand him, except he figured out his name was Meriden, and he figured he was important, and so he began to make gestures, asking and pointing, and it became pretty obvious what he wanted. Satu sidled up to his dad and said, they want a place to live. Where could we put them? Where should we let them stay? His father looked at him, and he did not look pleased with the way this conversation was going, but his father said to Satu, we'll put them in Tama's house. Tama's house? In his hut? Yes. And the chief spoke to the people of the village, put their things in Tama's house. Everyone's eyes got wide, but they obeyed. He was the chief. They collected all these items and took them to one of the houses, which actually didn't look that nice. The roof had a big hole right up in the middle of it, and then there were holes and weak spots all around the sides of the hut that was made from bamboo and palm leaves. It just didn't look very nice. And once you got inside, it didn't smell very nice. It didn't feel very nice if you happened to be walking barefooted. It was a very grimy, dirty hut. And Satu tugged on his father's back as he went. Dad, are you sure? Won't Tama be upset when he comes back? And wouldn't there be the evil spirits in Tama's house? And his dad said, no. Certainly the evil spirits went with Tama when he went to work on the other side of the island last week. They will not be back for a while. The villagers all gathered around to watch and peek through all the holes in the side of the building as Hans and Marta and their parents began to open boxes and set things out. And as they did, Hans's father was humming. And nobody had ever really heard humming before. All the people looked at each other. What is that sound? That is amazing. What is that sound? And then he opened a box and everyone's mouths fell open as he lifted out from inside a large crate. He lifted out what looked like a box at first, and then he lifted the lid to the box, and everyone thought, okay, that's a really nice box if it has a lid. But then he kept lifting more lids in the box. This was a box full of lids. And they were really thin, and there were hundreds of them. Now, they didn't know what that was. They'd find out later it was a book. They'd never seen a book before. But he opened this book, and then he closed it and set it aside, and he pulled out another and another. He had so many of these amazing boxes full of lids, and he set them on a shelf. The people crowded closer watching, and Hans's dad was no fool. He knew the people were watching, so he looked around, and then he grabbed another box full of lids, opened it to a particular lid, and began to do something that the people had never heard before either. He began to sing. He sang in his language, and so Satu did not know what these words meant, but he would certainly learn them later as he became more familiar with their language and as they began to teach him. But he sang this, and this was the first time Satu had ever heard this song. It was not the last time he'd ever heard this song, and it would not be the most important time yet that Satu ever heard this song, but it was the first, as he sang, "A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing." And his voice, they'd never heard a voice like that. Satu crept back from the building. His heart was just so full. There was so much emotion inside of him. He felt kind of bumpy on his skin and kind of trembly in his knees. He didn't understand the words, but just the sound of the singing made him so, what was this feeling inside? Happy? He went over behind his own home, and he thought, I can make those sounds too. I must learn to make those sounds. Satu is smart. He catches on to things fast, but I'll tell you, singing he did not catch on too fast. He opened his mouth and tried to sing behind his hut, and it sounded like someone was killing a goat. So he closed his mouth. He'd have to work on that more later. But he got to listen to the song. He got to listen so much over these next couple of weeks as the people helped build a house. Well, where did they build, you wonder? Hans's father had been looking. He walked from place to place, up the hillsides, along the edges of the jungle, inside the village, outside the village, and everywhere he would go, Chief Meriden would follow him. And when the father would ask, "Here? Could we build here?" Chief Meriden would just shake his head. No, no. And no matter where they asked, he would say no. Until Hans's father figured out the only place that Chief Meriden didn't really bother him about looking for places to live was on the seashore. Within the salt grass that grew on the shoreline. The area that belonged to the sea spirits and which Chief Meriden didn't feel he could have any control over. No one in their right mind would want to build there anyway. But apparently Hans's father was not in his right mind, because over the next couple of weeks, and with the help of lots of payments, not only of cookies and lumps of what turned out to be sugar, but also of little beads and small mirrors, the people helped to build Hans's house. They chopped down logs and dragged them to the shore. Hans got Satu and the other children of the village to collect rocks, as many rocks from the shoreline as they could. They made a huge pile of rocks, and after the house was built, then Hans's father took the rocks and made a wall that went out from one side of the house, made a three-sided stone wall, and within that took out little things, little tiny things from a package. They were seeds, but much smaller than the seeds that Satu was used to. And he planted, and Satu said, "Oh, he's building a garden. Wonderful. Oh, I wonder what kind of food they grow." Well, you know, the first thing that popped out of the ground was not food, it was beautiful flowers. And Satu had never seen anybody wasting time growing flowers before, but apparently Hans's family liked to have things looking nice. Not only was there a flower garden growing and a beautiful stone wall, but the building, the house, was not just lumber and leaves on the top. They had white paint they put on it, whitewash, Hans kept calling it, and it was a beautiful place. They moved out from Tama's hut, but before they moved out, they left it looking nice too. The hut that it used to stink no longer stank. The hut that used to have holes in it was no longer full of holes. They patched the roof. They cleaned up all the mess inside and threw it out. They fixed the ladder going up into it. They left Tama's hut looking, well, it had never looked that nice. They moved into their house, and the day they moved into their house, Meriden pulled Satu aside and said to him, "I am very worried." "Why is that, Father?" "I'm very worried because they're going to stay. They're not leaving. I thought that if we wouldn't be nice to them, I thought that if we wouldn't let them have a nice place to stay, and then we wouldn't let them have a place to build a house up along the hillside or near the jungle, that they would leave, but they haven't. They've built down by the sea spirit land on the salt grass, and now they're going to stay. I'm very concerned. I don't know what else to do about it. The only thing I can think of is we must send for Tama." Satu's eyes got big. He realized he hadn't really thought about Tama the last couple of weeks. The fact that Tama was not there. And what also surprised Satu was the fact that for the first time in weeks, a feeling that wasn't happiness came into his heart as his father spoke of Tama. A feeling that felt like the opposite of happiness, like sadness or even fear. As his father said, "I will get a messenger. Tama's been gone on the other side of the island too long. I'll get a messenger. I'll send him there. He will fetch Tama. And he will come and he will know what to do. For his witchcraft is strong." And Satu knew that was true, because Tama was the witch doctor of the village. And Satu knew the witch doctor's old witchcraft would not mix well with this new magic of Hans and his family. We'll find out what happens tomorrow.